On August 14, 2004, a woman named Elias Thorne walked into a ranger station in the Olympic Peninsula carrying a backpack that had been discontinued in 1995. Her boots were brand new, yet the soles were worn down to the composite. She didn't speak. She didn't cry. She simply placed a weathered polaroid on the counter. The photo showed four teenagers smiling in front of a jagged rock formation known as the Throat. Three of those teenagers had been declared legally dead for 7 years. Elias was the fourth. But here is where it stops making sense. The photo in her hand was dated September 12, 2003. Elias Thorne had been missing since July 1996. For 8 years, the world moved on, but the girl standing in the ranger station hadn't aged a single day. Her skin was clear of the sun damage you'd expect from a decade in the brush. Her hair was the exact length it had been in her high school graduation photo. Ask yourself why a human being would reappear with the same cellular composure they had 8 years prior while carrying evidence of a life lived in the interval. The search for the Thorne Party in 1996 was the largest in the history of the Pacific Northwest. 200 volunteers, infrared drones, K9 units that refused to track past a specific stand of hemlock trees. No one found a scrap of denim or a silver of bone until 2004. You're looking at a map of the Olympic National Forest right now. It's 900,000 acres of temperate rainforest. You think you know what lost means. You think it means a wrong turn or a twisted ankle. But Elias Thorne wasn't lost. Elias Thorne was hidden. In 1996, Elias was 22 years old. She was a competitive orienteer with a degree in geology. She wasn't a hobbyist. She was the person people called when they got turned around. Her companions, Marcus, Sarah, and Leo, were seasoned hikers. They had 4 days of rations, 2 GPS units, and a satellite phone that worked perfectly during their final check-in. At 10:14 a.m. on July 11, 1996, Marcus sent a text to his father. "Reach the base of the Throat. Fog is heavy, but the trail is clear. See you Sunday." That was the last time any of their devices pinged a tower. When the van was found at the trailhead 3 days later, the doors were locked from the inside. The keys were sitting in the ignition. The hikers' wallets and wedding rings were lined up neatly on the dashboard. This detail wasn't released until 2019. Think about that. Why would 4 people, heading into a 4-day trek, strip themselves of their identities and lock their means of escape from the inside before disappearing? Investigators call this terminal lucidity of intent. It suggests they knew they weren't coming back. But the footprints leading away from the van told a different story. There were 4 sets of tracks heading into the tree line. They weren't running. They were walking in a perfect single file, each person stepping exactly into the footprint of the person in front of them. It's a technique used by soldiers to hide their numbers. But who were they hiding from? The initial search focused on a 5-mile radius around the Throat. It's a vertical climb, treacherous and slick with moss. Searchers spent 14,000 man-hours combing every crevice. They found nothing. No campfires, no discarded wrappers, no biological traces. The forest was sterile. Then, on day 11, the lead tracker found a single white carnation sitting on a flat stone at the summit. White carnations don't grow in the Olympic Peninsula. They don't grow in the wild at all. When the tracker picked it up, he realized it wasn't a flower. It was a highly realistic wax carving. Inside the petals was a small handwritten note. "The air is thinner where we are, but the view is better." The handwriting was verified as Leo's, but Leo had been blind in his left eye since birth and suffered from severe vertigo. He hated heights. He never would have made it to the summit in a heavy fog. At 2:02 p.m. on the 12th day of the search, the atmospheric pressure in the valley dropped so sharply that 3 searchers experienced spontaneous nosebleeds. The wind stopped. The birds went silent. For 60 seconds, the entire mountain felt like it was holding its breath. And then the first anomaly occurred. A search helicopter pilot reported seeing a group of 4 people standing in a clearing 400 yards below him. He circled back. The clearing was empty. When he landed to inspect the site, he found 4 depressions in the tall grass where people had been laying down. The grass wasn't matted, it was scorched. Forensic analysts later called this a thermal void. It's what happens when heat is sucked out of an environment so quickly that the moisture in the plants crystallizes and shatters. There was no fire, just a sudden, violent absence of warmth. This is the moment the investigation shifted from a rescue to something the Park Service refuses to name. You've probably driven past a trailhead like this. You see the warning signs about bears and cougars, and you feel a shiver of controlled fear. But the signs don't warn you about the geography itself. They don't tell you that in 1996 the mountain didn't just take Elias Thorne, it kept her. When she returned in 2004, the clothes she was wearing were chemically identical to the ones she disappeared in, but they had no traces of forest debris, no pollen, no dirt, no microscopic spores. She was surgically clean. The only thing on her person that didn't belong to 1996 was a small digital watch on her wrist. The time on the watch was moving backward, 1 second at a time, ticking toward a 0 hour that no one wanted to witness. At 3:30 p.m. during her first medical evaluation, Elias looked the doctor in the eye and said the first words anyone had heard from her in 8 years. She didn't ask for her parents. She didn't ask for food. She said, "The door is still open. They're waiting for the rest of you." None of this explains what was found in her pocket. It was a piece of stone, obsidian black and polished to a mirror finish. When geologists at the university examined it, they found it wasn't volcanic glass. It was a material that doesn't exist in the periodic table. It was heavy, dense, and vibrated at a frequency that caused electronic devices within 10 feet to reboot. This detail was buried in a 2006 internal memo. Ask yourself why the government would hide a rock. The mystery of the Thorne party wasn't that they vanished. It's that the forest seemed to have replaced them with something else. While Elias sat in a high-security ward, her parents were told she was suffering from dissociative fugue. But you don't stay 22 for 8 years because of a mental break. You don't come back with a watch that counts down to your own disappearance. The search teams in '96 had missed a cave system that appeared on no topographical maps. They called it the blind spot. It's a region of the forest where compasses spin and GPS signals reflect off the canopy as if it were solid steel. In 2004, 2 weeks after Elias returned, a retired detective named Miller decided to go back to the blind spot. He was the investigator proxy who couldn't let go. He had spent his retirement studying the thermal voids and the wax carnations. He believed the hikers hadn't moved through space, but through a rupture in the environment itself. On September 1, 2004, Miller sent a final radio transmission from the base of the throat. His voice was trembling, shifting from his usual analytical tone to a near whisper. "I found the van," he said. The dispatcher reminded him that the van had been towed to an impound lot in 1996. "No," Miller replied. "I found the van. It's here, in the trees, and the lights are still on." When the recovery team reached Miller's last known coordinates, they found nothing but a circle of white carnations, carved from wax, melting in the afternoon sun. Miller was gone, but his radio remained on the ground, broadcasting a sound that forensic analysts still argue about, a sound that sounded like 4 voices humming a melody that didn't exist until 2012. The 2004 disappearance of Detective Miller was the catalyst the Park Service needed to seal the perimeter of the blind spot. They called it an environmental recovery zone, but the locals saw the black SUVs and the vibration sensors being hammered into the granite. The system didn't want answers, it wanted containment. While the public was told the area was unstable due to seismic shifts, the 2019 declassified logs from the Regional Dispatch Center reveal a series of acoustic anomalies that occurred every night at 3:11 a.m. for 3 months following Miller's disappearance. The sound wasn't wind, and it wasn't animal. It was the sound of a human heartbeat, amplified across the valley floor, synchronized across 40 miles of wilderness. By October 2004, the obsession had moved from the woods to the hospital room of Elias Thorne. She was being held under a John Doe psychiatric hold that bypassed standard legal oversight, a move authorized by a federal agency that technically doesn't oversee national parks. Her room was kept at a constant 68 degrees, but the nurses reported that Elias's skin felt like ice to the touch. One nurse, who resigned 3 days after her shift, claimed that when she drew blood from Elias, the sample didn't separate in the centrifuge. It remained a singular dark, viscous mass that pulsed when exposed to light. "She isn't eating," the nurse's leaked report stated. "She just stares at the digital watch. The numbers are at 00:04:12:09. She told me that when it hits 0, the weight will balance." This is where the evidence begins to contradict the very laws of physics we rely on to feel safe. On November 12, 2004, the watch hit 0. At that exact moment, every light in the hospital failed. The backup generators tested weekly did not engage. For 12 minutes, the facility was plunged into a darkness so absolute that staff reported being unable to see their own hands in front of their faces. When the power returned, Elias Thorne was still in her bed, but she wasn't alone. In the chair beside her sat Marcus, Sarah, and Leo. They were exactly as they appeared in the 1996 Polaroid. They were wearing the same hiking gear, clean and pressed. They were breathing in perfect unison. But here's what the hospital security footage, which was lost during a 2005 server migration, actually showed. They didn't walk through the door. They didn't climb through the window. They simply appeared in the frames between the strobing of the emergency lights. One frame, the chair was empty. The next 3 adults were sitting there, staring at the security camera with an expression of profound, terrifying neutrality. The government's response was immediate. The entire floor was evacuated under the guise of a chemical leak. The 4 of them were moved to a black site in Nevada, but the paperwork trail ends there. There are no death certificates. There are no prison records. There is only a single 2011 satellite image of a remote stretch of the Olympic Peninsula that shows 4 distinct thermal voids moving in a perfect square formation across a ridge that shouldn't be accessible to humans. But let's go back to the theory no one wants to believe. Why would the mountain take them and then give them back? To understand that, you have to look at the geology of the throat. It isn't just granite. It's a massive deposit of piezoelectric quartz sitting on top of a subterranean pocket of pressurized gas. Some theoretical physicists suggest that under specific atmospheric conditions, like the pressure drop recorded in 1996, this geography acts as a natural hard drive. It doesn't kill you, it records you. It takes a snapshot of a human being, their DNA, their consciousness, their physical state, and stores it in the lattice of the stone. But a hard drive can be rewritten, and it can be corrupted. If Elias Thorne was a file that was reopened in 2004, she wasn't the original, she was a copy, and the copy had been edited. This explains the backwards ticking watch. It wasn't counting down to a death, it was counting down to the syncing of the other 3 files. When the watch hit 0, the mountain finished uploading the rest of the Thorne party into our reality. But here is the contradiction that ruins the theory. If they were just copies, whose bones did a hiker find in 2017? The hiker was 3 miles away from the throat, in an area that had been searched 50 times. He found 4 skeletons huddled together in a small depression. They were wearing the exact same gear as the Thorne party. DNA testing confirmed the match. They had been dead since 1996. The cause of death was determined to be simultaneous cardiac arrest. Their hearts simply stopped at the exact same millisecond. So, if the original bodies died in 1996, who walked out of the woods in 2004, and who is being held in that Nevada facility right now? This detail wasn't released until the 2017 autopsy report was leaked. The skeletons were missing their inner ears. The vestibular system, the part of the human body that handles balance and spatial orientation, had been surgically removed, not by a knife. The bone had been vibrated away. It's a forensic signature that matches the frequency of the obsidian stone found in Elias's pocket. Ask yourself why an entity or a geography would need to remove the balance of its victims, unless where they were going, up and down, were no longer relevant. No one has explained this, No one has tried. The Park Service continues to update its missing persons database with routine disappearances, but they never mention the wax carnations. They never mention the heartbeat in the valley. They want you to believe that the woods are just trees and shadows, but you know better. You've seen the maps. You've felt that sudden drop in temperature when you walk into a certain clearing. You're standing at that trailhead now. The sun is setting. Your car is a mile away. You hear a sound, a soft rhythmic humming that feels like it's coming from the ground beneath your boots. Do you run, or do you wait to see if the air turns cold? The forest isn't a place. It's a predator that doesn't eat. It archives. And once you've been recorded, you never truly leave. The garage where Miller parked his car is still there. People park in his spot every day. They complain about the static on their radios. They don't realize they're listening to a man who is still trying to send a transmission from a year that hasn't happened yet. In 2023, a drone pilot flying unauthorized over the restricted perimeter of the blind spot captured 30 seconds of 4K footage that the Department of the Interior spent 6 months trying to scrub from the internet. The video doesn't show monsters. It shows a clearing where the rain is falling upward. In the center of that clearing, 4 figures are standing in a circle. They aren't moving. They aren't speaking. They are looking directly up at the drone, their faces blurred by a localized static that digital sensors can't resolve. This is the evidence that changes everything. If the Thorne party died in 1996, and the copies were taken to Nevada in 2004, who was standing in that clearing in 2023? The answer requires looking at the mirror image contradiction. When Elias Thorne was first processed in 2004, a radiologist noticed something impossible. Her heart was on the right side of her chest. Every internal organ was perfectly mirrored. In medical terms, it's called situs inversus, but Elias wasn't born with it. Her 1995 medical records from the university track team show a perfectly standard anatomy. This suggests that whatever printed Elias back into our world didn't just copy her, it flipped her. And this is where it stops making sense for the rest of us. In 2025, a series of seismic sensors placed around the throat began picking up a pattern. It wasn't tectonic, it was binary, a sequence of pulses that, when translated into GPS coordinates, pointed to the home addresses of the original search party volunteers from 1996. Within 48 hours of this discovery, 3 of those former volunteers vanished from their homes. No signs of struggle, no forced entry, just the smell of ozone and a single white wax carnation left on their pillows. The theory the system is hiding is no longer about lost hikers. It's about a geographic infection. The blind spot isn't a location, it's a 0-point threshold. Think of the forest as a mirror. For 28 years, something on the other side has been studying our reflection. It took the Thorne party to learn how we move. It took Detective Miller to learn how we think. And now it's using the volunteers to learn where we live. This detail wasn't released to the public, but the frequency of the heartbeat in the valley has increased. It's no longer 60 beats per minute, it's 120. The mountain is excited. You've probably driven past a place like this, a stretch of highway where the radio cuts out, or a hiking trail that feels heavy. You tell yourself it's just geology. You tell yourself that the feeling of being watched is just a primitive instinct left over from our ancestors. But your instincts aren't lying. They're detecting the thermal void before it arrives. What this means for you is a reality that is becoming increasingly fragile. The sinking that began in that hospital room in 2004 wasn't a localized event. It was the start of a replacement. If a geography can rewrite a human being, it can rewrite a town. It can rewrite a timeline. The 2023 drone footage ended with a hard cut to black, but the audio continued for 5 seconds. In those 5 seconds, a voice that sounds exactly like yours, your pitch, your cadence, whispers a date. October 14th, 2027. No one has explained why the mountain knows your voice. No one has tried. The throat is currently being outfitted with a sound suppression array by a private contractor with no public board of directors. They say it's to protect the local owl population. But if you look at the schematics leaked last month, The array isn't pointed at the trees, it's pointed at the sky. They aren't trying to keep the noise in, they're trying to stop something from answering. The trail to the throat is officially closed. The maps have been updated to show it as a non-traversable ridge. But the mountain doesn't care about your maps. The geography is expanding. Every year, the blind spot grows by exactly 400 feet. In a decade, it will reach the outskirts of the nearest suburb. You're sitting in your room right now, it's quiet. But if you press your ear against the wall, you might hear it. Not the hum of the refrigerator, not the wind outside. A rhythmic, heavy thumping coming from deep within the foundation. The mountain isn't in the Pacific Northwest anymore. The door is still open, and it's getting closer to your street.